The Trump freefall.
From the Battelle studio at WOSU at COSI, this is Columbus on the Record. Joining Mike Thompson this week, Laura Bischoff, State House reporter for the Dayton Daily News, Karen Kassler, State House bureau chief for Ohio Public Radio, Joseph Moss of the Ohio Hispanic Coalition, and Michael Miller, former Franklin County prosecutor.
Just 3 weeks ago, Nate Silver's 538 election tracker gave Donald Trump a 60% chance of winning Ohio. Today, that same website gives him a 38% chance. The free fall began with what now seems like a tame revelation that he did not pay federal tax for 20 years. But the negative slope line sharpened with the release of that tape where he brags about groping women.
We all heard on that tape what he thinks of women and how he treats women. And last night he doubled down on his excuse, saying that, well, it's just locker room banter. But you know, it wasn't just this one video that was so disturbing, even shocking. We have seen this kind of behavior throughout this entire campaign.
Then came reports of alleged sexual assaults. Several media outlets tell the stories of women who say they were groped by Trump. Allegations all denied by the candidate.
These claims are all fabricated. They're pure fiction and they're outright lies. These events never, ever happened. The Clintons are criminals. Remember that. They're criminals. These attacks are orchestrated by the Clintons and their media allies.
Laura Bischoff, 2 new allegations just this Friday. Where does Donald Trump go from here?
Well, I think he's going to continue to try to deflect and, say it's lies, it's a media conspiracy, it's rigged, and then continue to push reporters and voters to look at the WikiLeaks and say, Clinton's crooked, try to push the attention onto her side of it. I know we'll get to talking about that in a little bit. What I think the problem is for Donald Trump is that, saying go through thousands of emails is very complex. And what is not complicated, though, is a 59-year-old man bragging, a 59-year-old wealthy, powerful man bragging that he can force himself on women against their will because he's a celebrity. And I think that that's dismissing it as locker room talk was a huge mistake for him, and it's really ignited a lot of anger from women and men.
And then at the debate, he was pushed to say it never happened, and then within 48 hours, women are starting to come forward, and that makes the situation even worse.
Well, I think he's even doubling down on that now by saying he's implying these women are not women that he would find attractive and therefore not women that he would consider groping in any way, which is, that goes completely against what sexual assault is about. It's about power, and the comments that he's made have maybe reached some of the people in his base, but they've alienated an awful lot of people who really see this as part of his mindset toward women and toward his own behavior.
And it brings up the secondary problem, which is that of rating or grading women, which is something that is offensive on its face. The problem that he's really having to confront is the fact that years before he has made statements that seem to support that he might act in this fashion. Whether he said that was just talk or that it was action, I think with the women coming out now, I would hate to have to defend him.
Mike Miller, you have said on the show before that you do not support Donald Trump, but what do you make of this?
I don't know what to make of it, Mike. It's a circus. I mean, obviously I have no particular faith in anything Donald Trump says. I don't deny any of these things or doubt any of these things that are being said. I do question some of these people coming out this late. I just question the whole thing. It's been 10 years, 12 years. Nobody does anything until 4 weeks before an election. It doesn't detract from what's happened. I mean, as Joe said, there are tapes of him talking years ago saying pretty much the same thing. And so it just, I just think he gets deeper and deeper every day, and there's no way out for him.
But I do think, though, that when there's an accusation of sexual misconduct against a very powerful figure like Donald Trump or Bill Cosby, oftentimes it takes a long time, and it takes kind of like a building up for people to come forward and say, yeah, it happened to me too. There's a real reluctance for the victims to come forward. I'm not saying that any of these people are truthful or untruthful. That's to be determined.
I think you're right about that, and I wanted to add that the timing of this is critical because we are less than a month away from the election. So if these women, what they're saying is true, they may wanted to have come forward because this person could be elected president, and they wanted to share their story. I'm not, again, saying that they're telling the truth, but the timing of this is absolutely critical.
And you can see a media organization being very skeptical of reporting one of these allegations. But then when the tape comes out and he's bragging about it in his own voice, it gives those allegations a little more weight.
He set himself up. You know, and the thing that keeps going through my head is this probably isn't the last of it. I can't believe that Hillary's negative research organization has an empty bag at this point.
But there's a poll out, Mike, this week, the Marist poll, I think it was NBC Wall Street Journal, even after these allegations came out, still had Trump up by 1 point, basically tied with Hillary Clinton. What do you make of that?
Well, I think a lot of Trump people, many of whom I think are disenchanted Democrats also. In Ohio, yes. And I think it doesn't make any difference to them. They're fanatically for Trump. They want change, change, change. They feel like things have not gone their way for the past, pick any time you want, 16, 20, 24 years. And they're fed up and they want somebody different. So whatever happens, I think the vast, vast, vast majority of those people are not going to change. Now, other people who have made up their mind, kind of on the fence, maybe leaned Trump 2 weeks ago now, I think he's losing those people in droves, which has amounted to this fall from 60% to 38% in the state of Ohio.
And that was one poll. I mean, other polls have indicated that, in fact, it's hurt him a great deal more than that.
There's one theory out there that that Trump is just trying to muddy this up, turn everybody off, drive down turnout, his supporters will come out, and that'll help him on Election Day. Is there that much thinking going into it, or is he just being himself?
Does you mean the scorched earth
Yeah.
approach? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that speech that he gave in Florida on Thursday, you know, it's basically, he's just blowing it up. He's saying it's rigged.
Shackles are off.
The shackles are off. It's rigged. They're crooks. I'm the only one who can save America.
That whole idea, though, that it's rigged is really a potentially very dangerous thing to talk about, because whoever wins this election is going to have to govern. And if that person doesn't have the authority to govern because there's all this speculation about whether the process was rigged or not, is really frightening, because you have to think about this person being in office for the next 3 or 4 years. And what does that set either one of them up for?
That's right. And it's a similar narrative to the birther argument, to try to discredit the president.
All right, topic 2, Ted Strickland, who trails Senator Rob Portman by double digits, is trying to capitalize on Rob Portman's reluctance to dump Trump. For months, Portman has denounced Trump's stances and statements, but he said he still supported him. Now, after that videotape, Portman says he can no longer support Donald Trump.
I believe in this case, it's a personal decision on my part, that what he said was so offensive and so demeaning and degrading, specifically to women, that I could no longer support him.
I think you made a political calculation because you saw some 120 or so respected Republicans in the country withdraw their support, and so you withdrew your support. I think that's an act of cowardice, not an act of courage, Senator.
That was at the Cleveland Plain Dealer editorial board, and the man in the middle, appropriately dressed, is the Green Party's Joe DeMayer, candidate for Senate. Karen Kassler, what do you make of this? Portman, he was slow to denounce Donald Trump, even though he really was arm's length the whole time, but he never said, I'm not going to vote for him.
Well, Joe DeMayer, that's the only time you'll see him. He will not be in any of the debates. The first one was today in Youngstown, and the next one's Monday and then Thursday. But yeah, I mean, there's been commentary about how Portman, his first statement right after the Trump tape came out, was that Trump made offensive comments and was right to apologize. And then there was this period where John Kasich came out and said that he could no longer vote for Trump, and other Republicans started saying that they could not do that either. And then Portman came out and said he could no longer vote for Trump and that he'd be voting for Trump's running mate, Mike Pence. And so there's been some criticism there. But it's just really interesting that Republicans are in this race and are watching them try to qualify their support for their nominee is you can see how much of a struggle it is for a lot of them, because they want to see their party win, but they're very concerned about this individual at the top of the ticket. And you see them try to struggle and say, well, look at what I said. Look at my whole statement. I'm talking about my concern about the whole country and not just this one circumstance, which is horrible.
Laura, I can see Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire, who's in a very tight race, the Republican senator up there, not wanting to annoy the Trump supporters. Rob Portman has a 96% chance of winning re-election, according to Nate Silver. Why is he dragging his feet on Donald Trump?
You know, it's interesting. It was one of the debate questions in today's debate about Friday, and you know, why is it that you stood by him during all of these other comments, all these other offenses against Gold Star families and women and minorities, Muslims, etc. And Rob Portman's answer was, well, this was the final straw, that hot mic video. I think it's a little bit nuanced. Okay, he was a little bit late compared to the other Republicans, but Barack Obama, when he was speaking to the Ohio Democratic Party this past week, one of his main themes was the mainstream Republicans who stood idly by while this crazy conspiracy stuff swirled around about the birther movement and they're taking away the guns, and he and Hillary are the founders of ISIS, etc. Those mainstream Republicans stood by while this, created an opening for Trump, and they shouldn't get credit for it.
Mike, what do you think? Should Republicans like Paul Ryan and Ted Cruz, I mean, John Kasich's been pretty outspoken, but even him has not been real defiant. Should Republicans have done more to stop Trump?
Mike, it depends on each Republican. I think to point this out and point the finger at Portman, why is a man allowed to change his mind about something? Strickland calls him a coward. It seems like to me Strickland was all in favor of guns, and now he's all opposed to it. But that's a courageous stand, and if Portman does it, you're a coward. I can remember 2 years ago, a lot of Democrats were running way away from Barack Obama as president. They didn't want him to campaign with them because of Obamacare. They did the same thing. They ran. You can stand up and say to them, why don't you come out and say, I mean, this is politics, and I think it's much ado about nothing, really.
Well, I think it's a little bit more important than that, in the sense that if there is any delight to be had on the part of Democrats, it's because the theory is that it wasn't just Donald Trump that created the problems. It isn't just Donald Trump that raised the issue of Mexicans and Muslims and the Gold Star family and John McCain and Captain Military and a long list of things that, quite frankly, were outrageous and were not disavowed by the rank and file. And to now say, well, this latest comment, that's just the straw that broke the camel's back. At least as far as President Obama's comments this week, he suggested that's disingenuous.
Is there any chance that are Democrats more optimistic now than they were a week ago, that Strickland has a chance of coming back here?
With Strickland, I think that there is optimism that Strickland can come back.
How much optimism? He's still trailing by 20
I tell you what,
there is
one argument that I don't know why it hasn't been advanced, and I think I've mentioned it on the show before. Why not mention, look, if you get Portman back in, he's going to walk in lockstep with the other Republicans in blocking what potentially President Clinton is going to suggest, or whatever it is that the administration might want to do. I think that that's a valid argument, but I'm not hearing it.
He doesn't have any money to get those ads on TV, though, Karen.
That's a real issue for Strickland. He knew going in that he was not going to have the money. It's actually been the case, and I don't think the debates, while they are extremely important, and I'm so glad we have them, I don't think they're going to help at all for him to get his message out. And Portman looks very strong and sending his message just as he has been in his ads and throughout this campaign.
Okay. Nearly lost in all the Trump controversy is another series of Clinton campaign emails published by WikiLeaks. The emails give us some insight into the Clinton campaign and some questionable tactics. There's a discussion about Clinton not talking to reporters. Some emails indicated the campaign was in contact with the Justice Department on the timing of the announcements about her private email server investigation. Apparently, her campaign got a debate question in advance of a town hall with Bernie Sanders, and the emails take a swipe at devout Catholics. Joe Moss, in any other cycle, this would be the story.
I think that it would be as well. In this cycle, it's obviously not as colorful, let's say, as the stuff that is coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. And also, by the way, most of the emails really had to do with making risotto, cooking recipes. There was really no big smoking gun. And a lot of the information concerning the Justice Department was actually public information anyway. So it's more, I would suggest that it's more gossip than anything else. Now, would I fault a Republican taking a grab at that and running with it? Absolutely not. It's all fair game.
Mike, has to be frustrating that these emails could be damaging to Hillary Clinton's campaign in a close race, but it's not a close race, at least not this week.
No, it's not. I think the campaign, what's coming out from the DNC, what they broke it into and got all that, as you mentioned, is interesting, and there'll be some things, as Joe says, that you can jump on, but I would have loved to have seen all the Hillary Clinton things that were destroyed. Nobody can get to them. I doubt if that would have been just gossipy stuff. I think it would have been major league stuff, but we'll never know.
Yeah, Laura, there's no email here saying that they conspired to spin the Benghazi story. There's no email saying that, I set up this server in my basement to hide the emails from everybody. That's the smoking gun Republicans are hoping for, but it's not there so far.
Well, I was going to say that I think one of the problems for Hillary Clinton over the next 4 weeks is how much of a drip, drip, drip will this be, and will it kind of build up to be a major problem for her? If they get some smoking guns, then yeah, it could be, the race could start to flip, but we'll see.
Well, and the drip, 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 I think, contributes to what Donald Trump keeps talking about and other Republicans keep talking about, Hillary Clinton's perception that she is corrupt, that she is a liar, these sorts of things. This is part of the narrative that has been built around her. And I think this constant what else is out there question, which we also have with Donald Trump, is a problem for people who are trying to decide which of the two they want to support.
Except they're more flexible with Trump.
Well,
because they're used to Trump
it is a different
boasting
standard
about things and inflating himself.
What does this do to the down ticket races? We've alluded to Rob Portman. Mike, how much do you think it'll hurt Rob Portman? And the congressional races here in Ohio really are not competitive, so I don't think any House races
all
here.
Republicans. I certainly don't think it can help them. Will there be a lot of ticket splitting? I'd like to think there will be. I don't know that that's the case. But it can be, it's no good for the Republicans because a lot of people will just vote the straight ticket or not show up or something. So Trump is going to hurt all of them. Now, how much? Is it enough to cost Portman the Senate seat? I don't think so. Will it affect local races right here in Franklin County? I think it will. To what degree, I don't know. But I think it's a bad omen for Republicans.
So these emails have to be upsetting to Bernie Sanders supporters to know that she may have gotten at least one question from a town hall debate.
That comes up all the time among
Sanders.
my friends. You're absolutely right, thinking that now some of the Bernie Sanders supporters, and God bless them, and they're close friends of mine, I think really hadn't worked the inside political game, and perhaps some of these things are shocking. The fact that you might have a plant in a town hall meeting to ask a question that you're going to know the answer to, I'm afraid that happens all the time. Mike's smiling. It's happened in my races. It's happened in his races. You want to do that. And sometimes some people even put their wives to ask the question. So there you have it.
I'm always on guard for plants, and I guard my questions very carefully when I'm moderating a debate. But Karen, this really does, debate chroniclers and historians are going to love this email because it does sort of chronicle what a major campaign for president gives you a peek behind the curtain as to what's actually said.
And that's been the fascinating thing, is to see some of these emails. And yeah, you see the risotto recipes and whatever, but you get to see the other things that I think are really very interesting to people if you really want to dig through. And there have been a lot of things that reporters are now going through and pulling out. NPR did a piece today about something that was pulled out of these emails. I mean, with this many out there and all these varied topics, there's a lot of things that we're seeing behind the curtain, so to speak.
Is it good that we know all this stuff? No one's going to use email anymore. No one's going to use email anymore.
No one ever uses email.
Mike Coleman did not send a single email the whole time he was mayor, from what I've been told. There was no emails.
Smart.
Smart,
All texts.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what you do now.
So anyway, it's paper trail. It's an electronic trail. All right, after the presidential race and perhaps the Senate race, you have to go pretty far down the ballot to find a compelling contest. There is one here in Franklin County. Prosecutor Ron O'Brien has a challenger for the first time in about 20 years. Democrat and Columbus City Council President Zach Klein wants O'Brien's post. O'Brien touts his experience and points out that Klein has never prosecuted a case in a courtroom. Klein says he'll hire experienced courtroom prosecutors while he builds better relationships between his office and the community. Mike Miller, you have served as Franklin County prosecutor. Do you have to have courtroom experience as a prosecutor to hold that office?
Good. You have to have it? No. Is it valuable? I think it's invaluable. I think it's the thing you need more than anything. You can't sit there and have 60 or 80 experienced lawyers, which Ron O'Brien has. No need to hire anybody. They're there. and sit around and handle 7,000 to 10,000 felony cases per year, plus a bunch of juvenile things, without any experience. I mean, I don't know how you go in and tell people you want it done this way, this way, this way. And Mr. Klein has admitted that he's never been in a courtroom in his life, any courtroom. And to come in and try and take over a position like this, dealing with all the homicides, the rapes, the major stuff that we have, I just find it inconceivable. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done. Will the area pay, the county pay a price for it? The citizens, of somebody coming in there without any knowledge at all, I think it's inevitable. It's nothing against him, it's just a fact of life.
Joe, is there a point there? Or is it just a good manager enough?
No, Mike, listen, I'm listening to everything Mike's saying. I agree with the vast majority of what he's saying. However, Zach is proposing a couple of things that I think are kind of interesting. One of them I definitely agree with. The other one, I'm not so sure. He wants deeper involvement on the part of the prosecutor's office, in fact, in prevention. I'm not sure that he's used that word, but he talks about going out in the community and talking to people and so on. And then Ron, who's a great guy, says, you know, I have been doing that. And in fact, I think both are telling the truth. Ron personally has been doing that, but he does not have the system that Zach is proposing in having his prosecutors go out in the community and talk to the community as to how to stay out of trouble, for example. Zach's also made some comments regarding trying cases. He's of the belief that there are not enough trials out of that office, and I tend to disagree with that. I think the reason there aren't any more trials is because they get settled.
This race has to be close based on the number of ads we're seeing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the fact that Ron O'Brien is being very public. He had a news conference this week about a serious story, but we don't often see him hold news conferences.
And the Democratic get out the vote machine is working.
One issue that's kind of tricky for really Zach Klein is the independence of an investigation into a police shooting. Ron O'Brien says, let the grand jury handle it as it does now. Grand jury is independent. Prosecutors do present the case, but the grand jury is independent. Zach Klein says he wants to study it further. Joe, why doesn't Zach Klein say, you know, independent investigations are a good idea?
Well, I'm not sure why he isn't saying that specifically. He may come around to thinking that that might be the case. Both of them are, in fact, right now elected officials, and there is whatever relationship there might be with the police, in fact, out of both, from both individuals.
So I assume the African-American community would like to see more independence, but he cannot annoy the police officers who he also wants their votes.
Exactly, and I think that happens. And that's not criticism addressed at Zach or even Ron. I think it's a reality, and this is a subject that is being discussed probably in most American cities right now.
Well, I'd just like to say two things. One thing Joe mentioned that Zach Klein wants to go out and prevent this stuff, these terrible offenses that happen. That would be wonderful if everybody could do it. I've never seen that happen across this country. We got a lot of problems. I don't think one person can go out and stop it. If he can, God bless him. It'd be the first I've ever heard of. But this thing about the police and so forth, I started that in 1985, and it used to be when there was a police killing, the police cleared them themselves, so that was it. And we changed it, and we went to the grand jury. We invited victims' families to testify. They wanted other people in. We would do that. And I don't know how you can be more open than a jury of your peers, just people drawn out of a hat, so to speak, to come in and be grand jurors. And we were open and above board at it, and it's gone that way for 31 years, I guess, now. And I think it's a very good system. Now, I think the problem is if somebody isn't charged and indicted, then the people that want them indicted think the system doesn't work. And I don't know how you overcome that. I just don't know how you do it.
If you look at the stats, there hasn't been a police officer charged through that system during Ron O'Brien's time.
There have not, but there have been a lot of police officers convicted, aggravated robberies, and police officers going to prison. They just haven't found one for a homicide
Well,
yet.
but that's not necessarily in carrying out their official duties, is that they themselves have engaged in criminal behavior.
Exactly.
But Mike, the grand jury is in fact a prosecutorial tool, and the prosecutor's office, a specific prosecutor that is leading that grand jury, and in fact can ask for a no bill or ask for the indictment to be handed down. Would it be an improvement? I know some people have mentioned of having transparency in the transcripts of the grand jury and letting the people know what goes on.
Quick on that, yes or no, Mike, because we got to get to off the record.
Okay, I'm just worried about people that come in and feel they're testifying with that nobody knows what they're going to say. They're worried about that.
Oh, okay.
All right, let's get to our off-the-record final parting shots, and Mike Miller, you're up first.
Well, I'll just get off the serious stuff we've been talking about. It's going to be a great weekend with the Cleveland Indians, as you and I know, Mike.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and we'll see what happens this weekend in the Ohio State-Wisconsin game. It's going to be just a fun weekend, and I'm going to enjoy that and stay away from politics.
Baseball is serious stuff, Mike.
It is.
Joe.
Mike, early voting has started here in Ohio, and I want to repeat a story of when my family arrived here in the United States, and I asked my stepdad, how is it that we became refugees? And he said, because we didn't vote. Voting is a great privilege, but it's also a duty. Please go on and vote.
Karen.
Shameless plug, U.S. Senate debate coming up on Thursday out at the City Club of Cleveland. I'll be co-moderating it. And also a reminder, there are 18 filed write-in candidates for president. If you fill in a name that's not one of those, like Mike Pence or John Kasich or Mickey Mouse or whatever, your vote for president doesn't count, and that's important to know.
Great. Laura.
The New York Times rejected Donald Trump's demand for a retraction of its article about the 2 women who came forward and said he groped them, and he's threatening to sue. My prediction is he will not sue because that would invite a parade of accusations and testimony and discovery.
And that letter was something else.
Discovery can be a wonderful thing. You know, after all this, we need a drink. Well, we can help you out. Thursday night, we'll host a Politics and a Pint, maybe 2. The event is at 7th Sun Brewing in Italian Village. Ann Fisher, Terry Casey, and Sam Gresham and I will be there. We'll recap that final presidential debate, and we will analyze whatever Donald Trump says between now and then. Thursday night, 5:30 at 7th Sun. That's Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online, Facebook, Twitter, WOSU.org. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.